Hello, everyone, and we'll just give a few seconds here as everyone continues to join in here and get ready to go. But thank you all for joining us here today. My name is Kara Oosterhuis. For those of you that do not know me, I am the Western Canadian Agricultural Field Editor at Real Agriculture, as well as a University of Calgary Communication and Media Studies grad. So it's cool to be able to be here to speak with you guys today. So we have some really interesting topics here today and some really interesting people to talk about said topics. As I said, I'm pleased to host today's webinar for the Simpson Center for Agricultural and Food Innovation and Public Education at the School of Public Policy. We appreciate you guys joining us. We wouldn't be able to make this happen without our audience, so we are happy you guys are here to join us along for the ride. Before I introduce our first guest here, I'm going to just say, although this is a Q&A, please hold your questions until the end. You can put them in at any point into the chat box, but we will not address them until the end after our two guests are finished speaking. So once again, we'll head right on into our first speaker. I'd like to welcome Dr. Kee Jim, Managing Director of Feedlot Health Management Services. Take it away, Kee.
Hi, Dr. Kee, we're ready to go. We can hear you.
Okay. Okay. This morning, I would like to begin by talking a little bit about what we currently do from a data collection viewpoint and management in feedlots, and then talk about what is happening and types of technology that will lead us into the future. So currently, when an animal arrives at the feedlot, they're all uniquely identified with a dangle tag, and that is cross-referenced to the EID tag, an electronic tag, which is part of the national identification system. So from the point of arrival in the feedlot, all individual animal events are recorded in Shootside computer systems. And all events that occur that generate data points, such as the temperature of the animal, the diagnosis, the various treatments that are administered to sick animals, things like weight, hip height, breed type, and other phenotypic characteristics. So we collect a vast array of information on individual animals. And daily, all of that data is transferred to our Feedlot Health Management Office here in Okotoks, Alberta. And we receive data globally from various production sites, obviously in Canada, the US, Mexico, South America, Kazakhstan, and China. And I'll just spend a few minutes, mainly focused on the animal health side of how that data is utilized to manage animal health. And this obviously happens very, very close to real time. So when that data comes in, based on algorithms that have been developed over actually the last 37 years by Feedlot Health Management, it will generate alerts, which will appear on the attending veterinarian's cell phone for a specific site. So if based on the morbidity, the sickness patterns, and mortality, the death patterns that occur, then interventions or steps may be taken on a pen basis. For example, the algorithm may say you need to revaccinate this pen because specific morbidity and mortality epidemiological patterns are being observed. So really the data system allows for continuous monitoring, remote monitoring of animal health events, and very close to real time. And if an animal dies, the animal would be prosected according to rigorously defined protocols, and those images would also be transferred to our post-mortem website here at the office. These images are taken with either cell phones or digital cameras, and the information is loaded onto a computer and sent to the office. So veterinarians here at Feedlot Health would examine the images, perform a diagnosis, and upload the results and get that information back, back to the feedlot. So postmortems are an important critical control point for managing animal health in feedlots. And so again, we can collect these images from production sites across the world on a real-time basis. In addition to that, these digital videos, for example, can be used to assist in the diagnosis of sick animals. So if the feedlot personnel or the cowboys spot something unusual, they can simply take a digital video, send it to our office, and get immediate input or assistance in dealing with a particular problem. So I've basically summarized what we're currently doing in terms of real-time, data collection, acquisition of those data points, transferring that to the office, and utilizing that information. But I believe that that is really just the tip of the iceberg. I believe that in the very near future, with all of the technological developments that are occurring, things will change here very quickly. I'll focus first on improving sick animal detection at the feedlot. Historically, that's been done by cowboys on horseback and by visual observation. They determine which animals appear to be not well, and then we bring them to hospital facilities, check their temperature, and administer antibiotics if necessary. So that whole process hasn't changed much over the 37 years that I've been involved in feedlot production. But I think that very quickly here, with the miniaturized sensors that can be worn by cattle to collect data points when the animal is in the pen, again in real time, and whether that's ultra high frequency tags, some of the GPS location technology, motion sensors, temperature, and so on, we are going to be able to collect data that we've not been able to in the past. And with these enormous data sets and data mining, I'm pretty convinced that algorithms will be developed basis to behavior and movement of animals in pens that will allow for much earlier disease detection than possible by humans and pen checkers. Believe that this is pretty good news overall for the system, because obviously animal welfare could be improved with earlier disease detection, and ultimately anything that improves efficiency will reduce the carbon footprint of cattle production. Other technologies that may assist in improving sick animal detection are some of the camera-based digital systems coupled with AI, right, could also be important, breakthroughs in the field. In addition to improving pen checking, there's Shootside Diagnostics that I believe will be an important part of the future. Today, when we get the animal in the chute, we're pretty limited in what we can do. We can take its temperature of the animal. We can assess, how the animal appears in terms of how depressed it is and so on. But in the near future, I believe that a blood sample will be taken to measure something in brackets in the blood constituents, and whether that's acute phase proteins, whether it's white blood cell counts, whether it's things like circulating nucleic acids. There's a Calgary-based company that is into this space where when a disease condition occurs, you get cell damage and you get nucleic acids circulating in the blood. And really each disease state creates a specific motif that can be used and quickly identified with PCR testing. So I believe that all of this Shootside stuff will, in the future, dramatically assist us with both the prognosis and the diagnosis of various diseases that affect feedlot cattle. Ultimately, it'll help us determine which animals need to be treated and which don't, and this will go a long ways for improving antimicrobial stewardship at the feedlot level, and will lead to a significant reduction in feedlot usage of antimicrobials as we get more specific and more refined in diagnostics. Other things at the shoot side that may be helpful is artificial intelligence or machine learning for enhancing some of the technologies that we've tried to use in the feedlot, such as ultrasound, and has not been historically particularly useful. But with some of the new stuff emerging from the AI-derived algorithms looking at ultrasound, they may be able to become useful for us at the feedlot level. There's other things that come to mind, technologies that say allow for automation of certain activities that occur around feedlots. Self-driving feed trucks, for example, I think will be with us within the next 3 or 4 years if they continue to develop at the rate that has happened. Things like bunk bots to read the amount of residual feed in the feed bunks instead of people going around to do that. I believe that can be done robotically. Drone technology. Currently, it's being utilized for counting cattle in feedlots. Most of the bank inventories that are done are done utilizing drones at this point in time. I'm sure that other applications for drones will be developed in the near future. And there's numerous automation things that are occurring, particularly on the feed mill side, right, to assist in preparation of the diets for feedlot cattle. Another area where technology will play an enhanced role is in predicting animal performance and carcass attributes. Really see this occurring in a couple different ways. One with the various genetic testing panels that are available, that ultimately they will greatly assist us in management of the cattle at the feedlot and help us refine how long each animal should be fed and make some of our sorting algorithms and things that we utilize today much more accurate than what we're doing. Also, quite a bit of interest in the three-dimensional imaging of cattle, again, to help predict, carcass attributes and assist in sorting. So to summarize overall, I think we are on the cusp of major technological change in feedlot production, unlike anything that we've seen over the last four decades. The cost of these technologies, the power of the computing power that's available, the availability of pretty low cost micro sensors, and the wherewithal to integrate all of these technologies together I think will make the next 5 years or so in feedlot production pretty interesting. And just as a final note, when I think there's always, particularly in agriculture, some skepticism of how quickly these things can happen. But I think we should all recall the story of Kodak, right? In 1998, they had about 170,000 employees worldwide. And within a few years, that entire business model all disappeared and the company went bankrupt, right? I mean, did we think that, digital technology would just annihilate that particular sector? Probably not. But I believe that there will be some unbelievable changes that occur that we probably can't totally envision right now, that I think will revolutionize the way we do things at the feedlot level. So I think I've chewed up my allotted time, and I will end the presentation there.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dr. Kee. That is very interesting information. I grew up on a grain and oilseeds and forage farm, so I think it's very interesting to see technology on the cattle side and the feedlot side, and where exactly drones are taking us and where some of this automation is taking us. So it's ever changing, and I think it's coming at us quicker than a lot of us may actually think. So next up on the list, we have Dr. Arvind Gupta. Dr. Arvind is he is a professor at the University of Toronto. So take it away.
Thank you very much, Kara. And let me start by thanking the Simpson Center for the invitation to speak. I was actually visiting the School of Public Policy last fall when I first learned about the center, and I was very impressed by the ambitions and the mandates. So particular honor to be invited back to speak. Let me start with a disclaimer. I'm a mathematician who was able to convince a computer science department to hire me. I've never worked in the agricultural space. I'm learning a lot about this space. This is fascinating, and I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. What I'm going to talk about is really a public policy issue, and I think what we just heard is a good manifestation of many of the issues that I'd like to talk about. Let me start by talking about a speech that was given just over a year ago by Minister Kifli, who's Singapore's Minister of the Environment. And he announced that Singapore was on track to produce 30% of its food domestically by 2030. Now, that's an amazing announcement. Singapore has no farms and no farmland. We wouldn't recognize what they call their agricultural industry, and yet they're ramping up food production very quickly. Now, they're just one example of countries that are striving to become self-sufficient. But the place we look at where they've made the most strides is the Netherlands. The Netherlands have 1/250th of the land base of Canada with about half the population. And yet they're the world's second largest exporter of food and agricultural products. Now, you might think, wow, but they're maybe very fertile. 80% of the land in the Netherlands is below sea level. They have some of the highest salt concentrations in their soil. And yet they produce currently 40 times as much per acre as we do in Canada. And their 5-year plan calls for them to get to 200 times the production per acre. And as we look at other countries, we look at Israel, we look at Taiwan, the United States, we're seeing something pretty remarkable going on in the agricultural space. Many countries are rapidly transforming their agricultural sector, and they're looking to move away from what we consider traditional farming and opening up incredible opportunities for their sectors. You know, agriculture is the industry that created human civilization. We decided to settle down because of agriculture. And today we're seeing the sector transformed into a knowledge industry. And some of the most advanced technologies we know are needed in the sector. So how did I come into this? Well, but the middle of last year, I got a phone call from the British Columbia Premier. And he said he wants to establish a task force to look at the future of food security. And I had to tell him that I know nothing about food or agriculture. I'm the wrong person. Other than liking food and eating a lot, I just don't see how I could contribute to this. But he assured me that he had 2 other task force members who were subject area experts, and he wanted somebody who understood technology and innovation. He wanted to look at how is this sector going to be transformed. So I sat on a 3-person task force. The other 2 members were Peter Dillon, who's the chairman of Ocean Spray and the largest producer of cranberries in Canada. He headed the task force. And Professor Lenore Newman, who's a Canada Research Chair at the University of Fraser Valley, and I learned is one of Canada's foremost experts in the transformation of the agricultural sector. So I'd say that on this task force, I spent a lot of time learning and I hopefully make small contributions. But one thing we decided to do was look at best practices across Canada, best practices around the world. And I think it was truly eye-opening for all of us on the task force. But the biggest takeaway we heard, wherever we went, is that Canada has everything it takes to be the world leader in agriculture and the applications of agricultural technology. But in parallel, what we heard is that if we don't want to do this, if we don't grab this mantle, other countries will. And our agricultural industry will become increasingly obsolete and uncompetitive. So one thing we decided early on, while our recommendations were to the BC government, this had to be part of a pan-Canadian strategy. And so we talked to the Canadian government very early. We went and talked to Ag and Agricultural Foods Canada, Finance, PMO, Industry Canada, both to make them aware of our work and to make sure that they were influencing us and we were influencing them. So before I tell you our recommendations, I want to review some of the advantages that Canada has. We are blessed with a very fertile land base. So I can go from Vancouver Island's Cowichan Valley to Newfoundland's Caudry Valley, and we see highly productive land in every region of this country. Furthermore, with climate change creeping on us, our productive land base is growing. In fact, we may have the fastest growing productive land base in the world. We have a ready source of cheap and reliable energy. And for an Alberta audience, you probably know that you're the largest producer of renewable energy. And so with agriculture producing about 30% of all greenhouse gases, linking the agriculture sector with renewable energy could make very significant contributions to reducing greenhouse gas production. Our colleges and universities are some of the best in the world. And interestingly, they've developed many of the technologies that we need to transform the agriculture industry. I'm just going to name a few. So we're a central player in genomics. We're a world leader in robotics. You just look at the Canadarm and all the know-how that's gone there. Artificial intelligence, you know about the AMI Institute at the University of Alberta and the sister institutes Vector and Mila. They're 3 of the world's most respected AI institutes. Many of the foundational technologies behind blockchains came from Canada, which is why 2 of the 5 most popular cyber currencies are in this country. And I can just go on and on. If you look at our work in new materials, which is impacting battery technologies, you look at our work in data science and data analytics, which is really critical for sensor networks. We are really amongst the top 3, sometimes top 4 countries in all these technologies that we need to deploy to transform the agriculture sector. But we have other advantages also. Let me go through those. We have a thriving startup scene. Per capita, we are first in the world in startups and third in the availability of risk capital. We have some of the highest educated population in the world. We're the first country in the Western world where 50% of our population attain the post-secondary credential. We have the highest percentage of STEM degrees in the Western world. And our universities are consistently moving up in the global rankings, even while we see a dramatic rise of universities in places like China. We're holding our own and even gaining. So why are we challenged? Why do we feel that we need a better strategy? Well, first, I don't think that we're focused on agriculture as an application area for all these great technologies we're developing. I always say that we're trying to build a mini-me Silicon Valley instead of looking at our advantages. And agriculture is a huge advantage. So much so that when Dominic Barton wrote the Growth Council report for the federal government, the very first example he gave was agriculture. We need to be doubling, tripling down our investment in agriculture. We need to deploy all these brilliant people that we have in this country to address the challenges in the sector. If I look at Singapore, Israel, the Netherlands, they've all chosen agriculture as a priority sector. For 100 years, the Netherlands has had agriculture as their top priority for investment. We don't see that kind of focus in Canada, and we're hoping that'll change. And I'd say there's something even more fundamental. We talk about food security, but it never hit us until March of this year, how critical it is for us to be protecting our food supply chains. When nearly half the migrant workers didn't show up in this country, suddenly we were faced with huge problems from meat packing plants to crop fields. I remember talking to the asparagus industry in Ontario, and they said they may not get 50% of the asparagus out of the ground this year. These are big problems that we have to think about. So let me tell you the recommendations we made. Our first is that the government needs to wholeheartedly adopt and believe in the UN Sustainability Development Goals. There are 15 goals, and almost all of them speak to food security. So goal 1 and poverty, goal 2 and hunger, all the way to goal 15, which is protect our ecosystem from deforestation and land degradation. Agriculture has lots to say in every one of those goals. So any future strategy around agri-tech has to be reflective of these goals, and it's going to be increasingly important as we see other countries adopting policies around SDGs if we want to build a big export industry. Second, our academic structure needs to be much better aligned with the needs of the agriculture sector. You know, if you go to the Netherlands, and we visited Wageningen University, which is near the top 100, very focused on making sure they're addressing the challenge of the agriculture sector, world-class faculty. Some of the best students in the EU want to study agriculture practices at Wageningen. So, well, Wageningen, maybe it's Wageningen. We have nothing even close to that. And if government is serious about agriculture being a priority area, we need to see something like that happen. Our recommendation was that we take the collective strength of the British Columbia post-secondary sector and create a world-class institute for both for research and training, and make it of the size and scale of some of the things we saw in Europe and we're seeing emerge in Asia. Now, it's not enough to work in an academic setting. We have to build a commercialization pathway, and here we have two recommendations. The first is to foster a startup ecosystem focused on agriculture and agricultural technologies. Every jurisdiction we visited has done this, and they're seeing a lot of interest by young people to get into the agriculture space. In Canada, the government of Canada is putting $200 million into incubators and accelerators. Provinces collectively are putting close to that. So we're putting a lot of money into this space, but we don't have a single incubator accelerator, large-scale incubator accelerator focused on agricultural technologies, and that's something we think needs to be changed. But even more than that, if we keep going down the commercialization pathway, we need to be building demonstration projects. We need to learn how these technologies can play out in the marketplace. We need to do proof of concepts. We need to bring industry to the table so that they can pick up these technologies as we demonstrate them. You know, we saw wonderful, wonderful technologies right across the country, but often isolated and no pathway to getting them into the commercial space. And the only way it's going to happen is if we put the investments into demonstrating these technologies so that industry can then pick them up and start marketing them. So all these recommendations are tantamount to declaring that we believe Canada can be a world leader, that we need focus on agriculture. My belief is COVID has made this go from a nice to have to a must have. We know that we need to be much more self-sufficient, but even more than that, we know that the world very much values Canadian agricultural products. And so, you know, huge potential for this sector. I'll just leave you one last piece. I was just talking to the High Commissioner for India in Ottawa, and he pointed out that for the last 15 years, our exports to India have been falling while in agriculture, while they've been increasing their imports from other countries. And he was asking me why it is that Canada is essentially abandoning one of the fastest growing markets for food in the world. What is it about the Canadian policy that's not seeing India as a huge, huge export destination? I thought it was a great question, because you have a country that sees itself well aligned with Canada, looking for many of the products that we can produce, and yet somehow there's some gap there. And so huge potential. And thank you very much for listening to me.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dr. Gupta. It is always very interesting to hear, like you said, maybe not involved in agriculture, but to hear your perspective and to understand the importance that it still brings to Canada and Albertan, the economy here. So we'll head into some Q&A questions here. Dr. Kee, do we have you on the line as well still?
Yes.
You bet. Okay, so the first question is, do we import animals and agro products from other countries? And if so, how do we ensure they are safe for consumption? And that is for you, Kee.
Yes, we import, in the beef cattle sector, we would import a significant amount of beef from mainly the U.S., but we also import beef from countries like Australia and New Zealand and so on. So to ensure that it's safe, Canada would only accept from those countries that they've deemed to be acceptable in terms of their procedures for slaughtering cattle. So the export countries have to be approved by the Canadian government, and the rules and regulations that surround all of that stuff have to be respected. So I'm certain that any of the places that we import food from, I'm happy that the food is safe. Otherwise, the Canadian government would not allow it into Canada.
Absolutely. And one more question for you here, Kee. Treatment of cattle under your business is very high tech. What percentage of Alberta cattle currently get this high-tech treatment using big data and algorithms to manage them?
I think it's difficult to say overall, but I think that when I look at the overall numbers, feedlot health management under their system would account for about 40 to 50% of the cattle that go through feedlots here in Alberta.
Okay, awesome. And the next question here is actually for Arvind. What impacts will cell-cultured meats have on technological developments in animal agriculture?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, we heard a huge variety of opinions on this revolution of new types of proteins. I think one thing it is doing is it's creating it's bringing a lot of new kinds of technologies into the cattle industry. Just to be clear, our task force was asked just to look at land crops. We weren't looking at animal. But what we heard a lot about was everything from these new types of plant proteins are going to displace a lot of the animal industry, all the way over to there's a lot of new technologies coming into the animal industry, the animal side, that's going to make it much more efficient and much less impact on the environment. So I think that's one of the interesting things about innovation. You can innovate in one part of the system and it filters into all sorts of new innovations. I'd say the school is really out. The animal proteins is not, the demand for animal proteins is not going away. How that demand is met in the future is the question. But we talked to some large cattle operations in the US, and we were impressed how quickly they're changing to address the fact that these new types of proteins are coming on the market.
Yes, absolutely. John Simpson actually has a question here, and he says, would it be appropriate for the Simpson Center to take a lead in the suggestions of Dr. Gupta regarding academic structure and alignment with agriculture?
Yeah, so I think one of the things we were hoping when our report came out was to see other provinces also develop strategies like this and roll it up to a federal or a national strategy. And that's why I was excited when I did visit the school last fall. And I said this, that, you know, the Simpson Center could take some leadership in nudging, in both coming up with some initial policy recommendations and nudging the province to take a pan-Alberta approach. I've actually been a huge proponent of having a pan-Western Canada approach to some of these things. If you look at how food moves in this country, pretty much from Manitoba going west, it's all being exported from the West Coast. So integrating that whole system could be hugely beneficial.
So next question here is for both of you panelists. What would be the first and most important change you would propose the legislature? Let's start with you, Kee.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
You bet. So the question is, what would be the first and most important change you would propose to the legislature?
I'm not totally sure. It's a pretty broad question. I'm not totally certain. Could they elaborate a little bit more on what area they're referring to?
Eric, if you could elaborate on that as well, that would be great. Do you have any comments on that, Arvind, or would you like elaboration as well?
Well, I would like to, you know, we have a supercluster strategy that picked 6 superclusters, which essentially identified industry sectors that we think are important to the country. The reality is that the way those are picked, it would be very hard for a sector like agriculture to break in because they're very heavily focused on development of new technologies. And also, if you just look at the sectors that are picked, they're sectors that are used to this kind of way of thinking, right? So ICT knows how to get this kind of money. But how would agriculture organize itself nationally to get a supercluster where the government would put $250 million into getting these? And so I was very fascinated in the Netherlands at how this was much more top down. Government decided that food security, food experts was going to be a critical industry for that country, and then helped organize the sector to become, we have something called the top sector program, which is like our supercluster program. And that's how they reap these benefits. So I'm not sure it's a legislative change as much as a different way of seeing things. We have a very much hands-off approach where the government says every sector can come and make its pitch. But then the sectors you expect to win these competitions, win these competitions. I think we need to look at it differently. Which are the sectors where we have a chance to be world best of class? And then how do we organize those sectors? And of course, you need to see leadership in those sectors come through.
Absolutely. So the next question here for you, Dr. Gupta, is when we talk about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, are we talking about tackling these globally? Minimizing Canada's national greenhouse gas emissions does not help meet global ending poverty goals. How do you reconcile the huge export role we fill right now?
Yeah, so I don't think that we're talking, the way that I see it happening in more and more countries is as they put in new regulations, they're trying to reflect the SDGs in that regulation. So when I look at agriculture, I'll just give you one example. So there's an SDG goal 12, which is to significantly cut food waste. About 45% of all food produced in the world is wasted, it's thrown away. Canada, it's depending how you measure it, it's between 40 and 50%. So we're right in line with other countries. putting in better policies that make sure that our supply chains don't waste as much food actually opens up global export markets for us. Because countries are saying we want to partner with jurisdictions that are wasting less food because that helps us meet our SDG goals. That's why I suggested hooking up some of the renewable energy with greenhouses, which Alberta is so well positioned to do, because that would actually mean that people would pay a premium price for Alberta agricultural products. So I think we have to look at it in that lens. Countries are prioritizing other jurisdictions that are helping meet their SDG goals, and that creates a huge opportunity for us. I actually, when I look through the SDG goals, I think there's a lot we could be doing in the agricultural space to align ourselves that wouldn't have a lot of cost to us and would build huge export markets. And we heard this in many jurisdictions. They're looking for supply chains to help them meet their SDG goals.
So next question here, either of you can answer. Canada, with all its quality controls in the agri industry, our products are often high quality and pure. So is there a premium for our agri products in the world market?
Most definitely. I mean, the example of beef in Canada. I mean, Canada produces, you know, high quality grain-fed beef, which is globally recognized as as an excellent product, right? So I don't think that on the quality side we've ever had any troubles in competing in the global export market. I think the biggest surprise probably for everybody, and it's been mentioned, given that the vast resources that we have in Canada, the natural advantages with respect to land, water availability, infrastructure, that we're not bigger players on the international scene. And it's been, you know, we're not exactly sure what the root cause is for it, but part of it is because of lack of priority for agriculture, both provincially and federally, right? So I think it's been mentioned, in order to utilize our potential, we need to have a serious look at agriculture, both federally and provincially, recognize it as a very important go forward strategy for our economy, and really get serious about it and put the effort and resources at it so that agriculture can realize its true potential in Canada. I think when other countries look at Canada and just really wonder what our problem is with respect to not being sort of the breadbasket of the world, we have all the natural advantages that other countries with much less natural capacity have managed to get ahead of us for one reason or another. But clearly we need to have a much better strategy, both as a country and as a province, in getting agriculture to the forefront.
And this, I guess, follows into a question on how is there any suggestions either of you have for getting the government's attention and get them to skip the high-tech, like attractive high-tech industries, and put high-tech towards ag and resource industries?
So I think, yeah, first, just to pick up on the point about export markets, you know, we were, a year ago, I was talking to the Ministry of whatever the food people are in China, and they made an interesting comment. They said Canada markets its food as a commodity. Like, we love to commoditize our food. The real money is in processing, because that's when you can say we have put together a bunch of ingredients of super high quality, and so now our food is worth much more than anybody else's. And they said they couldn't imagine a country with a better brand for high quality food products than Canada. And the Chinese have been sending over delegations of food processors to Canada because we're essentially a cheap feedstock, right? Our inputs are very cheap. We produce a lot of high quality food very cheaply. They think they can process it here in Canada and export it to the world at much higher margins. So it's an interesting dilemma for me why that's not happening more naturally, right? So if you look at the Vancouver port, all the ingredients to produce a lot of very high quality products are flowing through that port, but we're shipping them out in containers of raw material. letting somebody else process them. And when they process them, they get less value for them because they're no longer made in Canada. So I'm not in this space, and I've been asking this question, wouldn't it just make logical sense? Shouldn't I quit my job as a professor and just start making food with all these great ingredients that we get? Anyway, and I think that's where the real export market is for us. Because once we're commoditizing, we're paying a lot of transportation costs. And so we may have better barley than somebody else, but by the time we add our transportation cost to it, we're now really trying to reduce the cost of production of that barley. Instead, we should be focused on producing the best barley and putting it into other food stock. And then I don't know what one does with barley, but whatever it is, food you make with barley, I guess you make alcohol with it, right? So produce the best. Yeah. So, what's funny is that my wife makes her own granola and we buy ingredients from all over the world, but we should be doing this in Canada. Every single thing grows in Canada, and we should be like selling it for a premium product, just like we do with ice wine. We should be selling all this food at a very high premium. And the world is demanding this. The world is paying a lot for premium food right now. Sorry, I didn't answer your question. I even forgot what your question is, but it's something that just perplexes me why we're not doing it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely, I guess the question that we had here is how can you get the government's attention to actually focus on agriculture? Because we have lobby groups, we are out there trying to get them to pay attention to us, but at the end of the day, we're not the most attractive group.
The pandemic has done more to raise awareness of the issue than any amount of lobbying could. I find now in Ottawa, whether you're at Industry Canada, whether you're at finance, if you start talking about the need to transform the agriculture sector to be a much more impactful sector, they are all ears. And I'd say, so I just had a conversation last week with the Prime Minister's office, and they said, we know there's this strategy in British Columbia, but we're not seeing the BC government coming to us and saying, hey, we need help in implementing the strategy. So I think we have the federal government's attention right now. What we don't have is a coherent set of provincial strategies and even regions of the country working together to implement them. The one place that seems to be really pulling this off is Quebec. The amount of federal dollars going to Quebec right now to transform their agriculture strategy, amazing. You may not know this, but the largest rooftop farm in the world is being built in Montreal right now with huge amounts of federal investment. But it starts, I think, by provinces coming up with a great strategy and then going to the feds and saying, look, we need investment to make this happen. And I think they're ready to do it. Of course, they're not giving me money, but you can feel the change since March, that now they're worrying about food security.
Kee, do you have any comments on that?
Well, I believe that overall, the demise of other sectors that are not doing so well, right, that Canada had placed some pretty big bets on, will bring agriculture to the forefront. So I think that all throughout Canada, everyone's having a hard look at agriculture because they see it as something that we can do really well in the future, and we can develop our agricultural industry, and it can become a driver of the Canadian economy. We've always had that potential, and if there's a silver lining of COVID, maybe this will be it that brings to the forefront agriculture in all its forms. I mean, we've spent a fair time talking about beef cattle, but it's not the only sector, right, where we can be very competitive globally, produce high quality products, further process them here and export them to the world, right? So if I'm looking forward here very much to the future as these various global events work their way through the system. But we are well positioned. We always have been, but it's just a matter of getting this unutilized potential and getting it energized so that the sector can move forward very, very quickly.
We got another question in here for you, Kee. Do you or your customers have a connection to their international markets directly? And is there transparency in that link? And do we hear that there's a demand for low greenhouse gas emission beef or low antibiotic use beef?
Well, and typically the feedlot producers would sell their finished animals to, to packing plants, and they're large international companies like Cargill, Tyson, JBS, and so on. And all of them have programs that address those consumer demands for those types of products, right? Whether they be antibiotic free, whether they are more animal welfare friendly, hormone free, etc. So there's many different types of specialized production that occur to address those consumer demands or requirements. So we believe that all of those things in the aggregate increase the demand for beef, and we don't look at any of them negatively. If the consumer's always right, if they have a desire for a certain product, right, then we certainly should we should try to address it, and largely the industry has. I mean, you can buy grass finished products, you can buy beef raised under whatever type of production scenario that you wish.
Yeah, absolutely. You see it. You go to the grocery store and you can totally see all the different types and what the consumers want right now. And I think it's sometimes almost hard to keep up with what's wanted. But like you said, it is very it's very much the consumer's right. So we have to keep going in that direction, I guess. Dr. Gupta, we have a question here. I see from export data re agri-food products to India that our exports went up continually from 2000 to 2015. It has fallen since then drastically. Would you say this is due to export policies the current government is following?
Not that I know of, but again, I'm not an expert in this. I think one of the challenges we've had is that we've been pretty monolithic in the type of exports we've been making to India. We haven't tried to expand the suite of products that we export. And as India has become more self-sufficient in some areas, it's been challenging. I know that, again, just as from this conversation I had, that India is also looking at where they're paying a lot of money for imports, and can they do some of that stuff locally? So there's shifting demand. One thing that is true in India, has been a huge increase in demand for animal protein, just massive, massive increases. Not for beef so much. And I don't know if you know this, India is the largest exporter of cows in the world, but they don't consume them in the country. But a huge increase in pig and in pork consumption, chicken, fish, which we're not, for some reason, not jumping on that. But even a lot of plant products, we're just not marketing in India. And so that's why he was asking me, just why are we not more present in marketing all these other great products we have? We've really focused on pulses, and that is a very mature industry, but it's being driven down by price competition and local production in India. But I don't know if any government policy other than not enough focus on building these markets.
And we are very quickly running out of time actually here. That hour swings by pretty quickly. Before we go though, is there anything else, any last remarks either of you would like to make?
I would just like to reiterate some of the, the main theme here, and is that, Canada has enormous potential in agriculture, really across all of the provinces, right, to produce foodstuffs that would be highly desired by in other parts of the world. And we just have to get the impetus to realize that potential. And I think it's efforts like the Simpson Center and policy groups to try to get the attention of government and the attention of policymakers to get us going down this pathway. I truly believe that in a country of only 36 million people and the second largest land mass in the world, we ought to be doing a lot better in this space, and I think it really represents a bright economic possibility for the whole of Canada, is to realize our agricultural potential.
Yeah, I agree completely. I'm just going to leave with one little parable. 90% of the cherries produced around the world are from strains invented in Canada. So we have become the world expert at producing cherry strains. For about 3 weeks a year, Canada produces about 80% of the world's blueberries. So a few places we are actually have put a little focus and we've become really good at it. But every time you dig into this, it's because the government decided to put some investment behind these areas and really put us at the top. And once we got to the top, of course, we built a self-sustaining industry that kept us there. And I think this idea that we should always be totally hands-off and let the market just figure it out doesn't work when you're talking about large-scale industry policy and building particular sectors. It just cannot work. And so we have to decide where we want to play. And I think agriculture is just so obvious the place that we should be a world leader. We're, I think, number 5 in the world in agricultural exports, but there's no reason we shouldn't be number 1. And I think the Dutch just kind of laugh at us for ignoring the space and letting them, I hate to say it, euphemistically eat our lunch. But why can't we target to produce 200 times as much per acre of land from what we're doing today? I mean, it's just a frame of mind, right? If that's what we wanted to do, we could do it. So that's, I think, how we have to change our attitude, that this is something we're just going to go and do and just be the best at it.
Thank you very much, Kee and Arvind, for sharing your insight today. It has been super interesting to hear your take on things and where you think we are kind of going with Canadian agriculture and what needs to happen. So, and thank you to the Citizen Center as well for having us. It is always an honor to join along on these things, so thank you very much. Please keep an eye on your inbox for a follow-up email, and if you haven't registered to join us on October 14th, please do. This will be a good one. This will be exciting. We'll be welcoming Mr. Doug Horner, who will be sharing his thoughts with us on the future growth potential of the Asian markets for Canada's agri-food products and what role technology and global exports could play in Canada's economic recovery post-COVID. Thanks again for tuning in. Like I said, we would not be able to do this without you guys, so we appreciate it very much. Take care, everyone.
Bye.